Welcome everyone to our final event for the fall 2021 semester. Today we are doing things a little bit differently. We are hosting our colleague Chung Nguyen, who is a lecturer of the Vietnamese language here at Columbia, and she is also the de facto director of the Vietnamese language program here. Before I pass the microphone over to her, I would like to introduce the topic. So today we'll be continuing our conversation on the role, the place, and the meaning of listening comprehension in the second language classroom. And we will do that by sort of exploring certain challenges that come with the teaching of listening comprehension through the prism of Vietnamese language classroom. So without further delay, I will make Chung, she's already co-host. Let us welcome Chung Nguyen.
Thank you very much, Simon, and good afternoon, everyone. Let me share my screen. So thank you very much, Simon, for the introduction. And thank you very much, LRC, for inviting me to share my teaching experience in helping my students for the listening skill in my Vietnamese classes. To begin my presentation today, I want to go with the overview of the presentation. My presentation will go the following part. The first part, I will introduce. The first part will be, I don't know what happened to that. Yes. Okay. Yes, okay, sorry for that. It is about the technical things. The first thing is I introduce the Vietnamese language program at the Columbia. The second thing, I will describe some characteristics of the Vietnamese language. And for the next part of the presentation, I will share with you the challenges that my students often deal with and the strategies that I apply to help my students in developing the listening skill. And for the last part of presentation, I will share the assessment, the student feedback, and some my future plan for the listening skill. Then for the to begin with my presentation. Okay, for the first part of the presentation, I will introduce to you about the Vietnamese language program. Our program started in fall 2018 with a full-time lecturer is me, and recently we joined with us one program by a young lecturer is Mr. Vinh Nguyen. He also here today, and we are very proud to be served to the Vietnamese study program led by two professors, Liên Hằng Nguyen and John Phan. Besides that, the Vietnamese language program also works very closely with the Vietnamese Student Association to introduce the Vietnamese culture to the Columbia student community. We did a lot of different cultural events like Lunar New Year parties or Vietnamese poetry night. And even like last year during the pandemic time, we also invite the artists from Vietnam to introduce and to perform one of Vietnamese folk music, and with 100 participants. And the same thing that we did for the first time for the spring semester, the Vietnamese language program organized a workshop for the teaching Vietnamese language. And we have 12 language lecturers from the different universities in US and some lecturers from Vietnam join our workshop. And the curriculum now for the Vietnamese language program, we offer 4 regular courses from level 1 to level 4. And in the futures, we also want to offer some specific purposes course, like the intensive elementary for the heritage student, or the essential Vietnamese for professional working in research, for the researching in Vietnam and or maybe the Vietnamese for the business or law or international public affairs. And especially we want to have a reading classical Vietnamese for the grad students. Now I will tell you, as you may know, that the Vietnamese language is a tonal language, and this is a very difficult language for the English spoken learners. So the first characteristics of Vietnamese language is the tone system. We have 6 tones. It is compared to 4 tones with Chinese or 5 tones in Thai's language. But the second thing also very difficult for the student, I think, is the vowel cluster. For the Japanese or for Chinese, it is the characters. Vietnamese, yeah, this one is a vowel clusters. Vietnamese, we use the Latin alphabet, but we have 100 the vowel combination sounds, and it is very, very difficult to figure out differences between these sounds. And what we read in Vietnamese will be exactly the same what you write. So that is the thing that the student need to know all these combination sounds that can help them to read and to write and can to be listens. The last characteristics that I want to mention to you today is the regional dialect or accents in Vietnamese. We have 3 main regional accents. It is the northern, central, and southern dialect. For all 3 characteristics, what are the challenges to my student in learning Vietnamese language? So let's move to the next part of the presentation. Before I talk about the challenges from my students, I want to share with you some reviews from some researchers when they talk about the listening skill in learning language. According to the Duman and Lennons, they say that listening is a complex and selective process of receiving, focusing, deciphering, accepting, and storing. So you can see that the listening is a very complex process, and it's also require a lot of different skill that the listener need to have when they can understand the listening input. The other researchers, Larry Bakers, also say that during our working day, 70 to 75% we spend for the communication, and of which 45% is listening, 30% of talking, 16% in reading, and only 9% in writing. So we can see that the importance of the listening skill or the listening comprehension in our life, in our communication. So without understanding the listening input, we cannot start learning anything on the new thing. So it is in general for the listening skill. And what are the problems? God pointed out 5 problems that most of the learners often meet. The first one is the learner do not recognize the words. The second one, that the learners often neglect the parts of the speech that follow. The third problem is the learners do not trunk the stream of speech. And number 4 is the learner miss the beginning of the sentence or message. And the last one, concentration problems. So what are the challenges for my student? I did a small survey among my Vietnamese classes, and with 14 response from students, the most difficult items for my student in listening is tones and the combination sounds. The second difficult items for them is the new word, 20%. And for the others, 2 others items they pointed out is the grammar structures and speakers' dialects. The next slides, I will talk about the strategy that I will help my student to solve these problems. But I want to mention that I want just focus on the elementary levels, because for the elementary level, it is very need a strong foundation for pronunciation. Without understanding the language, they cannot do anything in communication in Vietnamese. So for the next slide, I will focus more strategy in my elementary Vietnamese class. So first of all, when I start working at the Columbia, I design a content-based and a task-based learning textbooks for elementary levels. Then I create and use an audio recordings for pronunciation and comprehensions. And the last thing I apply is the study listening approach that I use for my class and to scaffold for students is to top down, bottom up, and metacognitive. The first thing I think about start with the elementary level is I need to create a practical textbook for my student and emphasizing on the learning pronunciation and listening comprehension. So that are the contents of 2 textbooks that I create for the Vietnamese Elementary 101 and 102 with 20 lessons. And the main purpose of this textbook is focus on after, at the end of each lesson, my student can do what. So the task the student can fulfill for that. Besides that, emphasize for the listening skills. If we have more time in the Q&A, and if you're interested in about my textbook, I can share with you later on. Then after I design the textbooks, I need an audios for students to do at home also, like I can do in class. And the most valuable for my elementary, I'm sorry, I will talk about that. So this is the audio recording. And during the audio recording, I design the different type of listening exercise. I use 6 out of 8 different type exercise of Topdown recommended for combination between teaching pronunciation and the listening skill. The first one is a phonetic introduction. The second one is listen and repeat. Number 3 I use a lot is the dictation. Number 3 is listen and decide the sound the same or different. Number 5, it is marks the tones. It's very typical for the tonal language. And the last one is all different kind for the listening comprehension. And the next part, as you can see this slide, I give you some example of the listening exercise that I design in my textbook. Repeat often can be put in the new word part that the student can see the new word and how to pronounce the word and how spelling spelling of the word. For the exercise number 2 and exercise number 3 is listen and decide the same or different or listen and mark the tones. I put in the section of practice that student can hear the different grammar structures or they mark the tone in sentence or phrases. And the last part that I use a lot is to scaffold for student the comprehension is the listening and filling the missing information in the table, or listen to answer the question, or maybe the student can listen the information and decide true or false. And the next thing that I want to talk about the strategy that I apply in my elementary class. The first strategy I use is the bottom up. So the bottom up techniques is usually focused on the sounds, word, intonation, grammatical structure, and other components of spoken language. So for elementary level, I use a lot with bottom up because it is focused on the sounds that help the student have a good understanding in Vietnamese language. And you can see the example for this strategy that the same like exercise that I create in my textbook. The second strategy that I using in my listening class is the top down. So the top down is opposite to the bottom up. So the top down techniques will focus on the activation of background knowledge and the meaning of the text. And this one often we can use in the listening comprehension exercise, like listen and answer the question, or listen and filling the in the summary tables, or can see the pictures and decide the location of the pictures. So that is the top-down strategies. The last strategy I use is a metacognitive strategy. I think that maybe you also know about this, you also heard about this strategy. For me, when I found out this strategy, I think it's very helpful for me and helpful for the student because it covers 5 areas. The first one is the self-awareness. The second one is self-planning. The next one, self-monitoring. The number 4 is self-regulation. And the last one is the self-evaluation. For the metacognitive strategy, it can help the learners become more active learners in listenings or in general, in particular, and in general when they're learning the language. And I think for the metacognitive strategy, it is demonstrated by the following stages. The first step, it is equivalent, like as you know, the pre-listenings. So in this stage, the student can self-awareness, they can self-planning, or they can do predictings what they are going to listen to. And then for the first listening, second listening, the third listening stage, this thing, it is like while listenings. The student need to regulate, they can to monitor and to verify the information that they are going need to find out during the listening. And for the last stage, that is very important, that is the reflection. And often this stage is the post-listening, and when the student can self-evaluate themselves about the listening proficiencies. And when I found out the metacognitive strategy, I found out an article by Kristen Gott and Larry Van der Griep. They talk about the effective and reflective listening teachings, and they have one table to compare 2 teaching methods in metacognitive approach to listening instructions. The first one is the metacognitive pedagogical sequences for listening, and the second one is the integrated task-based and metacognitive listening lesson. For me, it is very useful for me because my textbook that I design, it is the task-based and content-based. So I combine this task-based and metacognitive listening in every class, and then I also to prepare for my student to self-aware of themselves, that what they need to prepare, and then they can explore the background knowledge that they can become the active learners. You should, I can give this one in the reference. So if you want to interested in, you can read more about these articles. So after the designing, after I got the designing the textbook, I also to found out the different challenges of my student and the strategy that I apply. So what is the, how can I to assess or to evaluate my materials or my strategy that I apply in class? I use for both summative and formative assessment. For the summative assessment, I use the quizzes and the tests. For the formative assessment, I use different integrated skills like reading, speaking, or writing, and then I go through different apps like Padlet, Flipgrid, Light, or I can ask students to write blogs. And especially in in the academic year 2019 and 2020, when I got granted from the LRC for professional development I developed the audio recordings. After 2 years, I applied for this audio recording. I do a pronunciation project to my student, that with the participant of 9 students, that's 6 first years and 3 is the second years. And the result is very encouraging me, that I designed this pronunciation project with 5 parts to check from the listening comprehension, from the reading aloud, and speaking. And you can see for the part one, is student have to listen and to write out the word. And for the first year, the student just gets 60%. But for the second year, the improve for the ability of listening and writing is 95%. The same thing that for the part 3, students have to write the dictation. So when they write the dictation, is it better for the first year and the second year? For the part 2, part 4, and part 5, they have to read aloud or introduce themselves in Vietnamese, and the same thing, have to write a blog. And as for then I also ask my student feedback for using the audio recording and the different type of listening exercise when they use my textbook. And here's some feedback from my student. For example, some students say that they want to have more listening in class than to listening to recording. And they also recommend that maybe can teaching the meaning of new words before having to identify the sounds. So we can see have the connection between the pronunciation and the comprehension. That student also asked me to combine the top-down and bottom-up of this skill. The other one, student can also mention about the different type of listening exercise like dictation, they like it. And they also want to do the same or difference to hear the same or different sound. The other one that the student also feedback that the audio recording is very helpful, and I will learn the combination sounds. And some students, they repurpose speaking part of different area of the audio recording to practice their listening comprehension. All the student, they using the workbook and the audio recording to listen back and write down the words right here and compare to the textbooks. So that is all the feedback from my student that I can do for the future plan. So for the next slide, to end my presentations, I want to talk about my future plans. So the first thing, I want to revise the current audio recordings. Some students also come to see me and they say that because most of heritage students come from the South, so they want to have an audio recording with the Southern dialects. The second thing, I want to have more language listening input authentic. So I want to film a series of daily conversation in Vietnam with the various dialects. The next one, I want to develop the audio visual listening practice through the films and the song for the second year Vietnamese. And the last one is I want to work with other Vietnamese language instructors in US to draft a guideline for the listening, reading, and writing skill guideline. For the last year, we work with others Vietnamese language lecturers, and we create the oral proficiency guideline, and it is funded by the Southeast Asian Language Teachers Councils. So that is very helpful for the less common taught language as Vietnam. So that is all. I think that's all for my presentation. And it is the references. If you're interested in, you can get more information from my references. And thank you very much for everyone. And I'm happy to answer if you have any question or you have any comment or thought you want to share with me. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Chung, for the presentation, which was pretty expansive. I'm going to open up the floor to any follow-ups, any questions, thoughts, ideas, comments that you may have for Chung, or in general, considering listening comprehension, since that was our theme throughout the semester. Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you so much, Chung, for joining us today. It's really great to have somebody talk about, how they're applying, the issues surrounding listening that we've talked about over the last few months with Simon, sort of moderating that discussion, but we were talking in a general sense, and here we're speaking in a very specific way. I was wondering about the heritage learners who take Vietnamese. Do heritage learners have do they have a facility with the tones? Do they have a pre-existing knowledge of the tonal system? Or is it something that you have to teach from the ground up? And if you do have heritage learners who are able to get the tones rapidly, or they already know them, how do you pair them, or how do you mix them with L2 learners, people who don't have any prior exposure to the tonal system in Vietnamese?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris. It's a very, I would say it is very interesting questions that always, when we think about the heritage students, that most of my students are heritage. They can speak, they can listen, but they don't know how to read and to write. And so the problem every time that the student, they can pronounce correctly, but they don't know how to read. And sometimes they often to mix up between the different tones. They think that it is, oh, I think this is in this tone, but it's not true. It is another one. So sometimes for me, like last year, I have 4 students in class and 3 are heritage. Only 1 is the L2 learner, but the L2 learner is the best student for the tones to compare to the heritage student. Because sometimes with the background knowledge, the heritage student often mixed up. But for the L2, they learn viewer at the beginning, so they very easier for them to get it. But for this year, I have 9 students for the first year, and half of them heritage and half of them is a mix. So that often also have a competition between 2 groups. And sometimes the heritage student can read faster, but for the listening and mark the tone, or rather vowel cluster, always not good as the other group. Yeah, so that is a challenges for me when I do for both heritage and non-heritage learners in class.
Do you have to give different kinds of activities or tasks to these different groups, or do you have them work together on the same tasks and activities?
I ask them to mix in the same group, because often some students, they have the challenges, have more challenges than the other one. They will come to see me in my office hour. But in general, in my class, I ask students to share to each other. I don't have separate for the heritage, or don't have the separate task for the non-heritage. Because sometimes they can to supplement for each other. Yes, someone's good at the listening, someone good at the writing, so they can do supplement for each other.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Chung, if you don't mind, I would also like to follow up sort of on this heritage speaker theme, since we are talking about listening comprehension, and you told us about your project here. I'm wondering if like, how do you calibrate, how do you design listening comprehension materials for both groups of students, for those that are heritage speakers and those who are not heritage speakers? Is it the same material? Is it the same material that sort of targets different things for different groups, or do you handle it with the activities?
Yeah, I think for me now, I cannot have the different, because we are the mixed class. I cannot have the different tasks for the heritage student or the different tasks for the non-heritage student in my class. When I design the listening materials, especially for the exercise, I just assume that all students are learning the new language. So in some case, like the background knowledge of the heritage student can help them, but sometimes cannot. So I use for me, I don't have to exactly specific tasks for the different group student. When I can do 2 different tracks, one for the heritage and the other one for the non-heritage, maybe I can decide the different tasks for these groups. Yeah.
Makes sense. Elon, I think your hand is up.
So thank you for this. I've been also working on an audio project, listening comprehension project, and for Hebrew. And I was wondering, I also focus on beginners and intermediates, and I wanted to ask about the number of plays that you do to give for any recording. Do you play the same recording again and again, or do you have a separate recording for first, second, and third? Especially when it comes to the speed and the parsing that you do, especially for beginners when it's very, very slow. Do you parse it more for them when you speak, like to avoid words merging into each other, or do you play it in different speeds when you do?
Yeah, it is a very nice question. Thank you, Ila. The same thing you can see from my student feedback. The student want more listening in class to compare to the audio recording. So often for the audio recording, I ask students to do at home. So in class, they will directly to listen to me. And they feel that it's easier for them at the beginning. They can figure out the tones and the different combination sounds. And then if we do in class, for example, for the audio, when I do the audio, every task, I repeat 2 times with the males and female voice. Yeah, so the student it is the audio that I create with the male and female voice for 2 times. And I know that the audios now is a little bit fast because students say that sometimes they have to listen. Many students say that they have to listen again and again about 10 times, for example, 10 times at home. And then I think that I will revise it to go slower, and maybe I have to find the speaker with, how to say, is like more perfect pronunciations that can help the student to figure out the sounds. So that is the first thing. The second thing is, I think for the half of semester, most of the listening exercise I ask students to do at home because I want to give them more time to prepare and to practice. I will practice a half in class and a half like they do at home. But for the second half of semester, like for the first year, I do more class, I do more listening in class because I need the student to speed up for the reaction when they do for the numbers, or they will do something for the directions, or maybe for the description. So something I combine for both in class and at home tasks. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, welcome.
Go ahead, Bean.
Oh, thank you for the presentation. It's very illuminating. Since you mentioned speaking in class, I wonder if there are different kind of challenges for students listening to you as their teacher, providing the correct standard of speaking and pronunciation, and listening to each other, different students in class speaking to each other, and they might have a variety of different dialects, like you said, the heritage, speaking mostly with the Southern accent, and some of the maybe L2 would have mixed up tonal variation in the pronunciation. So how does that tie in with, on the one hand, listening comprehension and trying to reproduce the correct pronunciation, and then understanding each other in class? Yeah, so thank you for some of the insight.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nguyen, for your question. That it is also a challenge. It's very challenging for me for my first year when we do the listening and speaking, because I come from the north, so my accent is the northern accents, and most of heritage students here is come from the south or central, and they always think, they always have one think that, oh, that word will be this tone, or this word is the combination. I said, no, the correct one is that. So we have to figure out the listening, understanding the sound first, then we reproduce by the speaking. And as you know that for the elementary level, that the same like the actual, they say that for the speaking, for the oral proficiency of student, only just to reproduce by memorize the words or the phrases that they learn. So before we can do for the speaking part, I have time for students to practice with the word or the phrase or the grammar structure first. Then we can do the listening exercise, and then they can see how the word can be pronounced. And then I ask students to do in the pair or in a group to do the same thing that they listen, the same thing they read it. And then I can go like to help them why they do in the pair. So that is the way I have to scaffold for students from many different steps before they can do for the oral proficiency. Yes.
Chris, yes.
Yeah, unmute.
I think Zhongxi had his hand up before I did, so I'll defer.
Oh, please.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chung, for the great presentation. Just to follow up with the pair work in class. So two students work together on listening to the audio you made for them. Is that right?
No, for the pair work, often I do for the speaking. Yeah, for the speaking. For the listening part, often I can ask students do the recording, like they do the flip grid, for example, and then I give the how to say, we call it like the peer review. So the student have to listen from the other friend, and then they can to listen and write down what the student describe about their daily routine or maybe about their family, for example, like that. So that is the way the student can hear from the different dialect. But that is the task. But we cannot do like pair work for the listening in class.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for the clarification. So if students listen to each other's works, since Vietnamese is a tonal language,
yes,
would you consider they listen to, let's say, incorrect pronunciation, like tones?
It's interesting that sometimes the student they did wrong tones, but right, when they produce, it's the right.
Okay, that's amazing.
It is so funny thing that they mark the tone is wrong, but when they produce by speaking, by oral, is the right. So that is difficult for me to see. For example, like the heritage student, when they do the orals, they always do correctly, but when they mark the tone in the writing, they did wrong.
That's
so, but yeah. So sometimes I always ask students, okay, pronounce exactly the tone you mark for me, and then when I ask like that, they say, oh, so I did wrong. Yeah, so that's why they can to figure out the different tones when they do it. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I will look into more of that.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think most of the time, heritage students do that. They always mark the tones or they write the wrong combination sounds. But when they produce the oral, it is correct.
And you do that activity in every class, not regardless of levels.
Every class, yeah. For every class, I emphasize on the elementary level and the second year, first semester. Yeah. After, I think for the second semester of the second year, the student is very good at the listening already. So I start to put up more comprehension. But for the first year and the first semester of second year, I do listening and reading and writing or speaking every class. Yeah, focus on the writing and spelling.
Since you do listening activities in class, that means compared to classes that have no listening activities in class, so do you need to make adjustments to what you teach, like reduction of grammar or words, since you need to spend time on listening. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So that is the reason why I create the textbook for the first year, that I don't want to focus too much on the grammatical structures for the first year, because I want to spend more time in the listening understanding or listening comprehension. And the Vietnamese language also is not a difficult in the grammatical structures. Yeah, so that is I have more time to focus more on the listening comprehension than the grammatical structures.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you, Chung. Chris, would you like to go now?
Sure. I'm actually glad that Zhongxi went before me, because he introduced the question I want to ask, which is, at the beginning of our series at the LRC, we said that most language classes dedicate very little time to listening. And I was wondering, if you evaluate the role of listening in your class kind of holistically, how much space does it take up? Does it have a very large role? Does it have a medium? How would you describe the role of listening in terms of the amount of attention that you give to it in your class?
I think I can say that for my classes, the listening role is we take account about 90%. So most of the time in my class is a listening understanding. This means not only the student not only listen from me, but also they listen from audio. They also listen to from other classmates. When I just give one word, the other one to have make questions, and then the other one have to answer that question, and then they just go like flow like this. So I focus more on the communication and the listening comprehension. I think I can say 90% of my class is the listenings. Yes.
Interesting. Great. Thanks.
Thank you.
I have a question if no one else is moving forward. So from also going back to the beginning of this semester and some of the things that we were considering back then, this mutually reinforcing dichotomy between top-down and bottom-up
Yes.
processing for students that are heritage or learning the language, the target language is the first time. It makes sense that the things that are new, that are foreign to them, would be most challenging, most problematic, right? So in Vietnamese, it would be, the tones, right? The segmental intonation, also, vowel clusters, and those would be the challenging things. And you talked a little bit about how you approach these problems from the bottom up perspective, right?
Yes.
With bottom up activities. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about some of the challenges that sort of emerge on the other end when it comes to the top down processing. Like, what are some of the things that your students seem to be struggling a little bit with, and how do you help them power through those struggles?
Yeah, I think the good question for using the top down in teaching listenings, because the bottom up is, as we know, that is more focused on the sounds or the intonation. But for the top down, it means that we focus more the background knowledge of student or the meaning of the text, So for the top down, often I use more for the second year's Vietnamese. It means a higher level student. They have to understand the text. And one skill or one task that I often ask students to do is listen to a dialogue or listen to maybe a descriptions and summarize for me the main idea in English. Yeah, so I ask students to summarize in English what the information you get from that. So from that one, I know the student understand the word or not, or the student can understand the meaning of the text or not. So I can figure out what are the challenges from my student. They know the word or no, they understand the meaning of the text, or they understand the ideas or the thought from the speakers or not. So I can find out the different chances for the second year student of a higher level comprehension from the top-down skill. When I ask students to summarize for me the main ideas or main information from the text, or maybe I can ask them to do in the different summarize in the table, for example. I give some question and ask student give more as much as you can about the information you can get it from the text. Yeah, so that is the different task and the way that I use with the top down.
Yeah, I have many thoughts about that, but I saw Veen nodding to many of the things that you were saying. Veen, I was wondering if you could, is this what you also do with your students when it comes to these sort of top-down processes, or does it look a little bit different in your classes? And if so, how?
Oh, actually, I teach the mixed advanced level, so I have very different challenges and strategies. But I think that one needs to have very good foundations for the lower level classes, and I don't have any experience in that. So a lot of the things that Chung presents, I find very illuminating, and I think that it's very helpful. But I don't know, I don't think that it applies to my class, because in my class, we focus mainly on reading and in-class discussion at a higher level, because I think they're fluent in the language already. And most of my students are graduate students, so they have a very focused and a higher level of proficiency to carry out the task in class, mainly discussion, and at home writing weekly blogs and mini projects and final project and so on. So listening comprehension, it's mainly in class between the students and me, and but I focus on other skills at a higher level. Yeah.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. That's fine. In that case, Zhongxi, if you don't mind, I wanted to go back to you, because Mandarin Chinese is etymologically related to Vietnamese. I mean, you have 4 standard tones, they have 6. But there are some similarities when it comes to the pedagogy here, right? So I'm wondering if what does the bottom-up instruction look like for you, for your students, whether heritage or not? Does it more or less coincide with what Chung was presenting, or is this a little bit different? Could you talk about that a bit?
Thank you for the question, and I'm not sure I can answer that question.
Okay, that's fine.
To me, I think teaching listening is very challenging to teachers, because it's not that you can explain something to students to help them understand what they listen to. You need to the audio information go through their ears, process, and hopefully they can understand some of them or most of them, and then after they understand, they can respond to your question or do activities. So one thing I'm very struggling with the time, because our teaching time, meeting time is very limited. If we have time for listening, that means we have less time for listening exercise, means we have less time for other practices, which also is very demanding on our time. So right now, to be honest, I don't have time to do any listening activity. I mean, of course, we're speaking. So I speak, they listen. Students speak to each other, they listen to you. So I don't see those kind of like a conversation or in-class discussion as an listening activity. I saw them like that's class. That's how class has been run. So if I want a student to have time to spend time on listening, to really pay attention to the audio, any materials in audio form, I'm referring to the put on the earphones, really focus on the audio. So in that case, I'm not sure whether in class I can do that. That's why I take another approach. I create materials for them to listen to outside classroom. That's actually my current approach. I'm not sure whether that's hopefully that's helpful to their language learning in overall. But in class, I just find it's really challenging to teach, because back 20 years ago when I taught in my school, we have classes specifically for listening exercise. So basically, teachers help them to listen and to understand, to listen to material and understand the content. That's called listening class. But in the we don't have that luxury having that class. Yeah, so that's the response. I just find it's really challenging. So my approach right now is to create like a really quality material for them to and give the motivation, reason to spend time on listening. Because I think the reason is very simple. You want to improve your listening, you need to listen. You need to spend time on listening. If they don't listen, there's no way they can improve, right? Right. That's why I'm doing podcast. So I want them to listen to the podcast, realize, oh, that's interesting. That's helpful to the studying in class. So I want them to be willingly to spend time after class to listen to the any materials in audio form.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. For those of you who may be interested in the series of podcasts that Zhongxi is working on between us and I think CTL, Zhongxi, would you like to share it with the participants? Maybe like a link or something?
Oh, sure.
For later. And as you
can share this one. I can. They're both on. They're on Spotify, Apple Podcast. If you Google, not Google, if you search the name of the series, I can type the name of the series.
So the series is, of course, in Mandarin. We do have a context of sorts for this project, which I will also paste in the chat for all of you who'd like to read up a little bit more on what Zhongxi has been producing. And as we're working on these links, I would like to pass the microphone to Pascal, who's had her hand here up for a while.
Well, thank you for this extremely interesting presentation. I really admire your work, because Vietnamese with the tones, must be very difficult to teach.
Thank you.
And listening comprehension, I can imagine how complicated it is. So I was particularly interested in what you said about metacognitive strategies that you were using, because of course practice is super important. And as Zhongxi was saying, you need to listen a lot. That's for sure. But there are students who maybe lack the keys, to know what to listen for. And that is something that, you are addressing. And so of course we can advise students to listen more, but you have to tell them also what to listen to, because and what to listen for, and what kind of reflection they have to apply to the strategies. So and you went very fast when you talked about this. So I was curious as to whether you had more details to give us.
Yeah, you want to your question is, or you want to I talk more about the metacognitive?
Yeah, how can you help your students to be better listeners, and how to, for example, be aware? Sometimes you need the keys. For example, you need to tell them French sounds like one word, because everything mashed up together. And yes, so we have something that's called the liaison and liaison, which means that you sort of link each word, not always, but a lot of words together. And then
Yeah.
there's something that's called contractions. Like sometimes you have the impression that it's one word, but actually it's five, but it's pronounced two sounds. So, and there's also the problem with spelling that can create confusions because they think something is going to be pronounced in a certain way, then they hear something that is completely different from what they were expecting, and so they don't recognize it. So I was wondering what kind of, what do you say concretely to your students in terms of strategies and thinking about listening?
Yeah, so that is a good question. So why I use the metacognitive here, and then to create a comprehensive textbook. So because in the textbook, in each lesson, I have the contents and have the task base. So at the beginning of the lesson, I will tell students that, okay, this topic of lesson, we learn about how you have to say about your daily routine, for example. So the student, they know that they will talk about the daily routine. They will listen about the daily routine. So that is the process of self-awareness. They have to think about the background knowledge of their daily routine. So, and then we go through the different platforms, the new word, they will have the modeling dialogue in the textbook that I create. And then the work in pair in the practice. We have the work in pair practice. So the student can do for the speaking in class and the listening practice. So it can repeat and repeat again. And then it is just like to form the ability for students to activate their background knowledge, and about that monitor, they can monitor themselves, how the plan, what they can do for the listening. Yeah, I totally agree with you. If we just say student, you have to listen, the student will say, no, I feel tired. So but we give them a purpose. That, for example, by the end of the Thanksgiving time, when you come home to your family, you can introduce yourself to your parents, to your grandparents, or you can talk about your daily routine to your moms, and then they feel happy when they do that. After the Thanksgiving, my students come back, they say that, oh, Cô Chung, I can hear something like this during my family to meet each other. That is the thing, that the reason why the student will have to become become a habit of listening. Yeah, so that is a metacognitive strategy. I think that is very useful when you equip for the students.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
Thank you, Pascal. Go ahead, Stefan.
Hello, everyone. Sorry, I was trying to take care of various things while people were talking. I wanted to address something Zhongxi talked about, but which some of you also kind of hinted at. As teachers, we always have to make choices. We have limited time, and if we don't focus on something, it's because we're focusing on something else. So I wanted to ask, what exactly are we focusing on if we don't focus on listening comprehension, especially if we know, and we know this, that the research has shown that listening comprehension is a true predictor of progress in language acquisition. And by focusing on listening comprehension, I mean explicitly and deliberately focusing. So, what are we doing if, what else is more valuable than that is what I'm trying to get at, so that we put listening comprehension aside, or we leave it to a kind of an implicit, or, do it on your own. It's just an open-ended question.
Grammar drills, right? Just kidding.
I don't know.
That's not false. It's not false grammar. But I would think maybe we think we are doing the right thing because we are using class time for conversation. So we feel they are talking, so they're also listening. So at least, I'm doing some listening comprehension in every class. So maybe we have this sort of false sense that this is enough if they also listen outside of class.
Could we, and again, it's easy for me to talk. I'm not teaching, so it's really easy for me from outside saying, yeah, well, we should do this and we should do that. I'm thinking maybe, could we have more comprehensive kind of exercise that support each other? So so that the conversation flows out of a deliberate and explicit listening comprehension kind of practice. You see what I mean? As opposed to having kind of separate skills. but then, I'm not sure. Like I said, I don't teach. It's easy for me to speak from the
Yeah,
outside.
I totally agree with Steve that we cannot to separate teaching the different skill in like separately. We have to integrate all the skill together. For example, if I want to student to do the listening comprehension, I ask the student do one oral activity first, and then the student can move the audio to the other student to listen and to summarize the main idea, or just write down the question that they don't understand about the audio that their friend that made it. So that is a combination of all the skill, not only only listening, I think.
Stefan, can I add one little thing?
You may.
Listening can easily be integrated with reading if you provide them the text that is in the listening, which is what I do. I have these recordings. I used Audacity for the Department of Education for, last 3-4 years, and I have this actual testing recording device. What I do is I have to find standard speaker and talk to them. So one end is always me. But for example, I'm reading at a lower level, word level, then first the alphabet level, letters level. So it progresses, and then situational, little conversations about things, and they're related to the day's lesson. And let's say, end of semester 1, I was reading about about my friend, about my family, familiar domains, and they're connected with them. So they get the reading of the recording through Audacity, they get the listening tapes. And now at any level, if they have the reading, what they're listening, so you are integrating listening and reading right away there. So you're not just doing one thing exclusively. And as for the question was, one interesting question was, how much time do you focus on listening? It's the classic rule that there are 4 components, and listening is tied with speaking, so you give them 50%, and then reading and writing. If you follow that, I find it very useful. If you have it as a component in every class, that conversation, and supported by audio and visual. If you visual, I can only do at a higher level, or I cannot, because that's very expensive. I looked into it to get them made in Calcutta. But audio is cheaper, but video is more expensive. But I can do the audio. I can connect with anybody, anywhere. And for my own recordings, I can use audio, and the other one, my equipment for actual testing. So that's the integration part.
Thank you, Durjan. I wanted to, oh yes, thank you, Pascal. Yes, that is after 4. So before I make a comment, it is after 4. So if this is the time for you to leave, thank you for coming. Again, we were recording this, so if you like to rewatch it, it will be on our YouTube channel by the end of the year, hopefully. And if you'd like to stay and talk a little bit longer, we will definitely be here. So thank you so much for your
Thank you, everyone.